The story of how the Apathy came to be for Volume 6 is a long one. Originally thought of by RWBY writer and voice actor Miles Luna, the Apathy has been a part of RWBY since before Volume 1. Thinking of and discussing the many different types of Grimm and the threats they could pose alongside Monty and Carrie, Miles wanted a Grimm that wasn't physically terrifying, but something frail. It was what it could do that would make it scary. Miles would then find a picture of a scarecrow that was posted to Reddit. This image would be the starting point of the Apathy. I was captivated. It couldn't move. It couldn't do anything really, but I was so disturbed by it. Miles would then begin taking inspiration from the stories and films he read and watched that left an impact on him over the years. The major influences for how the Apathy worked would come from the film Serenity, directed and written by Joss Whedon and released in 2005. And the short story of Bartleby the Scrivener by Herman Melville that was originally released in 1853. The film Serenity would act as the main influence for what the Apathy could do. In Serenity, there was a planet in which the government released an experimental gas on its people in an attempt to pacify them. These chemicals would work so well that the people affected would lay on the ground and die due to inactivity. The story of Bartleby would come to give the Apathy their name, as well as the name of the farmer who established the Brunswick farm. The short story has Bartleby be a new hire for a lawyer in Wall Street and actually perform well at his job. One day, the lawyer requested that Bartleby examine a small document, but Bartleby responded with,
"I would prefer not to."
This would escalate to more aspects of Bartleby's life as he would do less and less to the point where he wouldn't even eat. Bartleby's passive nature would eventually have him jailed and ultimately die of starvation, similar to how the people died in Serenity as described earlier. The phrase spoken by Bartleby, "I would prefer not to anything asked of him," is what stuck with Miles the most. In this tale was an idea of a man who became so apathetic to everything and everyone around him that he was fired, evicted, imprisoned, and eventually starved. Because when it came to doing anything, he would prefer not to. That line haunted me. I would prefer not to. The Apathy is a Grimm that causes those around him to feel more and more fatigued, as though a steadily growing weight was being placed on the victim. This would affect their minds and cause the victim to feel more apathetic to their surroundings and well-being. Until finally, the victim would stop moving altogether as the Apathy continuously encroached upon them. The victim constantly trying to run, only to have their spirit sapped away from them. The Apathy would come to have an additional ability to send out a large amount of this spirit-sapping atmosphere, referred to as a thrall, by laying out a loud scream. This idea would come from RWBY writer, voice actor, and director Kerry Shawcross, who took inspiration from the Legend of Zelda enemy called the Re-Dead. This enemy from the games would move towards its victims slowly and be able to paralyze them with its gaze while letting out a horrific screech, which is very similar to how the thrall from the Apathy works. The Apathy would come to be Miles' favorite Grimm, but due to the nature and power of the Apathy, it was deemed too powerful to introduce during the early introductory days of RWBY. The CRWBY originally planned to have the Apathy and the story of the Brunswick farm be a part of RWBY Volume 4. The idea during these travel days was to bring in more episodic stories while progressing each of the characters to their destinations, but due to the complexity of jumping between multiple different storylines that happened in different parts of Remnant, this idea and the Apathy had to be cut, or pushed rather. Volume 6 ended up being the opportunity they needed to bring in the Apathy, as Miles put it.
The storyline for the Apathy is one that I've had since before Volume 1, and then Volume 6 came around. We had, this enormous revelation about Oz and Salem, and when our characters are confronted with that, they're not in the greatest headspace. Very early on, characters keep referring to how tired they are, and they start saying things that might seem a little out of character, suddenly talking about giving up or just going home, or what's the point?
Our hero's natural low points in the volume helped to mask what would have otherwise been out of character behaviors and statements. The biggest hint I kept dropping was the line, "I'm tired." This line would be inspired from the similar line spoken by Bartleby in response to anything asked of him. I would prefer not to. When it came time to create the design of the Apathy, the task would first go to veteran RWBY concept artist Patrick Rodriguez. His original concept would eventually be passed over as it appeared to be more fast and ferocious than originally intended. The design looked like a mangled person, who was just skin and bones, that had a long tongue sticking out of its mouth, and whose limbs were mutated into sharp bones. During the design process, Patrick would actually become scared and depressed, and would need to step away from time to time because of this. This design reminds me of the Necromorphs from the Dead Space franchise, specifically the slashers. The design of the Apathy would actually be given to newcomer RWBY Kim, who has now created the concept and designs for all the new Grimm introduced in Volume 6. RWBY's concept would refer back to the original image of the Scarecrow that inspired Miles, while taking main inspiration from the artwork found in a collection of stories known as Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. The Apathy now looking like decaying, slow-moving corpses, better fitting the original concept of a frail Grimm that Miles envisioned. The design and implementation of the Apathy for Volume 6 is incredible. Giving these Grimm the look of rotting corpses helps elicit a feeling of unease and dread. Having the Grimm be slow and given the abilities they have also symbolizes the slow encroachment of death that can be prolonged but is inescapable. Well done to Miles, RWBY, and the rest of the team.
I'm always blown away by what the RWBY team is able to put together. They are some of the hardest working people that I've ever had the pleasure of working with. This whole volume has been wild, and it's so exciting to finally see this part of the story get told.